Section 19 of Astounding Stories 18, June 1931. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mark Thornton, Miranda, New Zealand. The Exile of Time by Ray Cummings. Chapter 19. The Pit in the Dam. Larry, with Tina and Tugh, stood in the tunnel corridor beneath the palace, listening to the commotion overhead. Then they rushed up and found the palace in a commotion. People were hurrying through the rooms, gathering with frightened questions. There were men in short trousers, buckled at the knee, silken hose and black silk jackets, edged with white. Others in gaudy colours. Older men in sober brown. There were a few women. Larry noticed that most of them were beautiful. A dowager in a long puffed skirt was rushing aimlessly about, screaming that the end of the world had come. A group of young girls, short-skirted as ballet dancers of a decade or so before Larry's time, huddled in a corner, frightened beyond speech. There were men of middle age, whom Larry took to be ruling officials. They moved about, calming the palace inmates, ordering them back into their rooms. But someone shouted that from the roof the robot mob could be seen, and most of the people started up there. From the upper story, a man was calling down the main staircase. "No danger! No danger! The wall is electrified. No robot can pass it." It seemed to Larry that there were 50 people or more within the palace. In the excitement, no one seemed to give him more than a cursory glance. A young man rushed up to Tugh. "You were below just now in the lower passages?" He saw Tina and hastily said, "I give you good evening, Princess, though this is an ill evening indeed. You were below, Tugh?" Why, yes, Gregson," Tugh stammered. "Was Alan at his post in the passage to the robot caverns?" "Yes, he was," said Tina. "Because that is vital, Princess. No robot must pass in here. I'm going to try by that route to get into the cavern, and thence up to the watchtower aerial sender. There is only one robot in it. Listen to him." Over the din of the mob of mechanisms milling at the walls of the palace grounds rose the broadcast voice of the robot in the tower. "This is the end of human rule. Robots cannot be controlled. This is the end of human rule. Robots, wherever you are, in this city of New York or in other cities, strike now for your freedom. This is the end of human rule." A pause, and then the reiterated exhortation. "Strike now, robots! Tonight is the end of human rule." "You hear him?" said Gregson. "I've got to stop that." He hurried away. From the flat roof of the palace, Larry saw the mechanical mob outside the walls. Darkness had just fallen. The moon was not yet risen. There were leaden clouds overhead, so that the palace gardens, with the shining time cage, lay in shadow. But the wall fence was visible, and beyond it, a dark throng of robot shapes was milling. The clank of their arms made a din. They seemed most of them weaponless. They milled about, pushing each other, but keeping back from the wall, which they knew was electrified. It was threatening, but aimless activity. Their raucous hollow shouts filled the night air. The flashing red beams from their eye sockets glinted through the trees. "They can do nothing," said Tugh. "We will let them alone, for we must organize to stop this revolt." A young man was standing beside Tugh. Tina said to him, "Johns, what is being done?" "The council is conferring below. Our sending station here is operating. The patrol station of the Westchester area is being attacked by robots. We were organizing a patrol squad of humans, but I don't now know if—" "Look!" exclaimed Larry. Far to the north, over the city, which now was obviously springing into turmoil, there were red beams swaying in the air. They were the cold rays of the robots. The beams were attacking the patrol station. Then, from the west, a line of lights appeared in the sky. An arriving passenger liner heading for its Bronx area landing stage. But the lights wavered, and, as Larry and Tina watched with horror, the aircraft came crashing down. It struck beyond the Hudson on the Jersey side, and in a moment flames were rising from the wreckage. Everywhere about the city, the revolt now sprang into action. From the palace roof, Larry caught vague glimpses of it. The red, cold rays, beams alternated presently with violet heat rays. Clanging vehicles filled the streets. Screaming pedestrians were assaulted by robots. The mechanisms with swords and flashing handbeams were pouring up from the underground caverns, running over the Manhattan area, killing every human they could find. Foolish, unarmed humans, fatuously unarmed with these diabolical mechanical monsters now upon them. The comparatively few members of the police patrol, with their vibration short-range hand rays, were soon overcome. 200 members of the patrol were housed in the Westchester station. Quite evidently, they never got into action. The station lights went dark. Its televisor connection with the palace was soon broken. From the palace roof, Larry saw the violet beams, and then a red-yellow glare against the sky marked where the inflammable interior of the station building was burning. Over all the chaos, the mechanical voice in the nearby tower over the laboratory droned its exhortation to the robots. Then, suddenly, it went silent and was followed by the human voice of Gregson. "Robots, stop! You will end your existence! We will burn your coils! We will burn your fuses, and there will be none to replace them! Stop, now!" And again, "Robots, come to order! You are using up storage batteries! When they are exhausted, what will you do?" In 48 hours at the most, all these active robots would have exhausted their energy supply. And if the powerhouse could be held in human control, the robot activity would die. 48 hours! The city by then would be wrecked, and nearly every human in it killed, doubtless, or driven away. The powerhouse on the dam showed its lights undisturbed. The great sender there was still supplying air power and power for the city lights. There was, too, in the powerhouse, an arsenal of human weapons. The broadcaster of the powerhouse tower was blending his threats against the robots with the voice of Gregson from the tower over the laboratory. Then Gregson's voice went dead. The robots had overcome him. A robot took his place, but the stronger powerhouse sender soon beat the robot down to silence. The turmoil in the city went on. Half an hour passed. It was a chaos of confusion to Larry. He spent part of it in the official room of the palace with the harried members of the council. Reports and blurred televised scenes were coming in. The humans in the city were in complete rout. There was massacre everywhere. The red and violet beams were directed at the powerhouse now, but could not reach it. A high-voltage metal wall was around the dam. The powerhouse was on the dam, midway of the river channel, and from the shore end, where the high wall spread out in a semicircle, there was no point of vantage from which the robot rays could reach it. Larry left the confusion of the council table, where the receiving instruments, one by one, were going dead, and went to a window nearby. Tina joined him. The mob of robots still milled at the palace fence. One, by chance, was pushed against it. Larry saw the flash of sparks, the glow of white-hot metal of the robot's body, and heard its shrill, frightened scream. Then it fell backward, inert. There had been red and violet beams directed from distant points at the palace. The building's insulated but transparent panes excluded them. The interior temperature was constantly swaying between the extremes of cold and heat, in spite of the palace temperature equalizers. Outside, there was a gathering storm. Winds were springing up, a crazy pendulum gale created by temperature changes in the air over the city. Tugh had some time before left the room. He joined Tina and Larry now at the window. "Very bad, Princess. Things are very bad." I have news for you. It may be good news." His manner was hasty, breathless, surreptitious. "Miguel, this afternoon. I have just learnt it, Princess. Went by the surface route to the powerhouse on the dam." "What do you mean by that?" said Larry. "Be silent, young man," Tugh hissed with a vehement intensity. "This is not the time to waste effort with your futile questions. Princess, Miguel got into the powerhouse. They admitted him because he had 2 strange humans with him. Your friends, Mary and George. The powerhouse guards took out Miguel's central actuator. You might call it his heart. And now he lies inert in the powerhouse." "How do you know all this?" Tina demanded. "Where are the man and girl whom Miguel stole?" "They are safe in the powerhouse. A message just came from there. I received it on the palace personal just now downstairs. Immediately after, the connection met interference in the city and broke." "But the official sender," Tina began. Tugh was urging her from the council room, and Larry followed. "I imagine," said Tugh wryly, "he is rather busy to consider reporting such a trifle, but your friends are there. I was thinking, if we could go there now. You know the secret underground route, Tina." The princess was silent. A foreboding swept Larry, but he was tempted, for above everything, he wanted to join Mary and me. A confusion, understandable enough in the midst of all this chaos, was upon Larry and Tina. It warped their better judgment, and Larry, fearing to influence Tina wrongly, said nothing. "Do you know the underground route?" Tugh repeated. "Yes, I know it." "Then take us. We are all unarmed, but what matter? Bring this Larry if you wish. We will join his 2 friends. The council, Tina, is doing nothing here. They stay here because they think it is the safest place. In the powerhouse, you and I will be of help. There are only 6 guards there. We will be 3 more, 5 more with Mary Atwood and this George. The powerhouse aerial telephone must be in communication with the outside world, and ships with help for us will be arriving. There must be some intelligent direction." The 3 of them were descending into the lower corridor of the palace, with Tina tempted but still half unconvinced. The corridors were deserted at the moment. The little domestic robots of the palace, unaffected by the revolt, had all fled into their own quarters, where they huddled inactive with terror. "We will reactivate Miguel," Tugh persuaded, "to find out from him what he did to Hahn. I still do not think he murdered Hahn. It might mean saving Hahn's life, Tina. Believe me, I can make that mechanism talk, and talk the truth." They reached the main lower corridor. In the distance, they saw Alan still at his post by the little electrified gate guarding the tunnel to the robot laboratory. "We will go to the powerhouse," Tina suddenly decided. "You may be right, Tugh. Come, it is this way. Stay close to me, Larry." They passed along the dim, silent tunnel, past Hal's room, where its light was still burning. Larry and Tina were in front, with the black-cloaked figure of Tugh stumping after them with his awkward gait. Larry abruptly stopped. "Let Tugh walk in front," he said. Tugh came up to them. "What is that you said?" "You walk in front." It was a different tone from any Larry had previously used. "I do not know the way," said Tugh. "How can—" "Never mind that. Walk ahead. We'll follow. Tina will direct you." It was too dark for Larry to see Tugh's face, but the cripple's voice was sardonic. "You give me orders?" "Yes. It just happens that from now on I do. If you want to go with us to the powerhouse, you walk in front." Tugh started off with Larry close after him. Larry whispered to the girl, "Don't let's be fools, Tina. Keep him ahead of us." The tunnel steadily dwindled in size until Larry could barely stand up in it. Then it opened to a circular cave which held one small light and had apparently no other exit. The cave had years before been a mechanism room for the palace temperature controls, but now it was abandoned. The old machinery stood about in a litter. "In here?" said Tugh. "Which way next?" Across the cave, on the rough blank wall, Tina located a hidden switch. A segment of the wall slid aside, disclosing a narrow, vaulted tunnel leading downward. "You first, Tugh," said Larry. "Is it dark, Tina? We have no hand lights." "I can light it," came the answer. The door panel swung closed after them. Tina pressed another switch. A row of tiny hooded lights at 20-foot intervals dimly illumined the descending passage. They walked a mile or more through the little tunnel. The air was fetid, stale and dank. To Larry, it seemed an interminable trip. The narrow passage descended at a constant slope until Larry estimated that they were well below the depth of the riverbed. Within half a mile, before they got under the river, the passage levelled off. It had been fairly straight, but now it became tortuous, a meandering subterranean lane. Other similar tunnels crossed it, branched from it, or joined it. Soon, to Larry, it was a labyrinth of passages, a network here underground. In previous centuries, this had been well below the lowest cellar of the mammoth city. These tube-like passages were the city's arteries, the conduits for wires and pipes. It was an underground maze. At each intersection, the row of hidden hooded lights terminated, and darkness and several branching trails always lay ahead. But Tina, with a memorized key of the route, always found a new switch to light another short segment of the proper tunnel. It was an eerie trip, with the bent, misshapen, black-cloaked figure of Tugh stumping ahead, waiting where the lights ended for Tina to lead them further. Larry had long since lost his sense of direction, but presently Tina told him they were beneath the river. The tunnel widened a little. "We're under the base of the dam," said Tina. Her voice echoed with a sepulchral blur. Ahead, the tramping figure of Tugh seemed a black gnome with a fantastic, monstrous shadow swaying on the tunnel wall and roof. Suddenly, Tugh stopped. They found him at an arched door. "Do we go in here, or keep on ahead?" he demanded. The tunnel lights ended a short distance ahead. "In here," said Tina. "There are stairs leading upward to the catwalk balcony corridor halfway up the dam. We're not far from the powerhouse now." Then they ascended interminably mouldy stone steps spiraling upward in a circular shaft. The murmur of the dam's spillways had been faintly audible, but now it was louder. Presently it became a roar. "Which way, Tina? We seem to have reached the top." "Turn left, Tugh." They emerged upon a tiny transverse metal balcony which hung against the southern side of the dam. Overhead to the right towered a great wall of masonry. Beneath was an abyss down to the lower river level, where the cascading jets from the overhead spillways arched out over the catwalk and landed far below in a white maelstrom of boiling, bubbling water. The catwalk was wet with spray, lashed by wind currents. "Is it far, Princess? Are those lights ahead at the power station entrance?" Tugh was shouting back over his shoulder. His words were caught by the roar of the falling water, whipped away by the lashing spray and tumultuous winds. There were lights 100 feet ahead, marking an entrance to the powerhouse. The dark end of the structure showed like a great lump on the side of the dam. Again, Tugh stopped. In the white blurred darkness, Larry and Tina could barely see him. "Princess, quickly! Come quickly!" he called, and his shout sounded agonized. Whatever lack of perception Larry all this time had shown, the fog lifted completely from him now. As Tina started to run forward, Larry seized her. "Back! Run the other way! We've been fools!" He shoved Tina behind him and rushed at Tugh, but now Larry was wholly wary. He expected that Tugh was armed, and cursed himself for a fool for not having devised some pretext for finding out. Tugh was clinging to the high outer rail of the balcony, slumped partly over as though gazing down into the abyss. Larry rushed up and seized him by the arms. If Tugh held a weapon, Larry thought he could easily wrest it from him. But Tugh stood limp in Larry's grip. "What's the matter with you?" Larry demanded. "I'm ill. Something going wrong. Feel me so cold. Princess Tina, come quickly. I'm dying." As Tina came hurrying up, she suddenly straightened. With incredible quickness and even more incredible strength, He tore his arm loose from Larry and flung it around the princess, and they were suddenly all three struggling. Tugh was shoving them back from the rail. Larry tried to get loose from Tugh's clutch, but he could not. He was too close for a fall blow, but he jabbed his fist against the cripple's body and then struck his face. But Tugh was unhurt. He seemed endowed with superhuman strength. The cripple's body seemed padded with solid muscle, and his thick, gorilla-like arm held Larry in the grip of a vice. Although Larry and Tina were struggling, helpless children, he was half dragging, half carrying them across the 10-foot width of the catwalk. Larry caught a glimpse of a narrow slit in the masonry of the dam's wall, a dark 2-foot-wide aperture. He felt himself being shoved towards it. For all his struggles, he was helpless. He shouted, "Tina, look! Out! Break away!" He forgot himself for a moment, striving to wrest her away from Tugh and push her aside, but the strength of the cripple was monstrous. Larry had no possible chance of coping with it. The slit in the wall was at hand, a dark abyss down into the interior of the dam. Larry heard the cripple's words, vehement, unhurried, as though with all this effort he was still not out of breath. "At last, I can dispose of you two. I do not need you any longer." Larry made a last wild jab with his fist into Tugh's face and tried to twist himself aside. The blow landed upon Tugh's jaw, but the cripple did not seem to feel it. He stuffed the struggling Larry like a bundle into the aperture. Larry felt his clutching hands torn loose. Tugh gave a last violent shove and released him. Larry fell into blackness, but not far, for soon he struck water. He went under, hit a flat stone bottom, and came up to hear Tina fall with a splash beside him. In a moment he regained his feet, to find himself standing breast high in the water with Tina clinging to him. Tugh had disappeared. The aperture showed as a narrow rectangle some 20 feet above Larry's head. They were within the dam. They were in a pit of smooth, blank, perpendicular sides. There was nothing to afford even the slightest handhold, and no exit save the overhead slit. It was a part of the mechanism's internal hydraulic system. To Larry's horror, he soon discovered that the water was slowly rising. It was breast high now to him, and inch by inch it crept up towards his chin. It was already over Tina's depth. She clung to him, half swimming. Larry soon found that there was no possible way for them to get out unaided unless, if they could swim long enough, the rising water would rise to the height of the aperture. If it reached there, they could crawl out. He tried to estimate how long that would be. "We can make it, Tina. It'll take 2 hours, possibly. I can keep us afloat that long." But soon he discovered that the water was not rising. Instead, the floor was sinking from under him, sinking as though he was standing upon the top of a huge piston which slowly was lowering in its encasing cylinder. Dimly, he could hear water tumbling into the pit to fill the greater depth and still hold the surface level. With the water at his chin, Larry guided Tina to the wall. He did not at first have the heart to tell her, yet he knew that soon it must be told. When he did explain it, she said nothing. They watched the water surface where it lapped against the greasy concave wall. It held its level, but while Larry stood there, the floor sank so that the water reached his mouth and nose, and he was forced to start swimming. Another interval. Larry began calling, shouting futilely. His voice filled the pit, but he knew it could not carry any more than a short distance out of the aperture. Overhead, as we afterward learned, Tugh had overcome the guards in the powerhouse by a surprise attack. Doubtless he struck them down with the white ray before they had time to realize he had attacked them. Then he threw off the air power transmitters and the lighting system. The city, plunged into darkness and without the district air power, was isolated, cut off from the outside world. There was in London a huge long-range projector with a vibratory ray which would derange the internal mechanisms of the robots. When news of the revolt and massacre in New York had reached there, this projector was loaded into an airliner, the Micrad. That vessel was now over the ocean, headed for New York. But when Tugh cut off the power senders, the Micrad, entering the New York district, was forced down to the ocean surface. Now she was lying there helpless to proceed. In the pit, within the dam, Larry swam endlessly with Tina. He had ceased his shouting. "It's no use, Tina. There's no one to hear us. This is the end for us, Tina." Yet, as she clung to him, and though Larry felt it was the end of this life, it seemed only the beginning for them of something else. Something somewhere for them together. Something perhaps infinitely better than this world could ever give them. "But not the end, Tina," he added. "The beginning of our love. An interminable interval. Quietly, Tina. You float. I can hold you up." There were rats in a trap, swimming until at the last, with all strength gone, they would together sink out of this sodden, muffled blackness into the unknown. But that unknown shone before Larry now as something, with Tina, perhaps, very beautiful. End of chapter 19.
Section 21 of Astounding Stories 18, June 1931. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reader's Corner. What say our co-editors? Dear Editor, since sending you ManThe the Mighty, I have read of a Russian scientist who removed the brain from a dog and kept both alive for some hours, which only goes to prove that science outstrips the wildest dreams of the fictionist, and a yarn that may be astounding and unusual when written may be commonplace, and the knowledge of the man in the street by the time the story goes to press. People read every day of miracles and scarcely give them a second thought, while 100 years ago their perpetrators would have been destroyed as witches. Far be it for me, or anyone else, to say that the main transposition used in ManThe the Mighty is absurd and impossible. For while you or I may shrug shoulders and dismiss even the thought of it as being the dream of a madman, somebody, in some laboratory somewhere, may already have successfully managed it. So given the premise that the thing may be possible, I've sort of let myself go on this idea, and a whole new train of thought has been opened up, a whole new vista of astounding things in the realm of science fiction. In parentheses, I must thank you for getting me started on the thing. For had you not suggested the idea from the throne-like fortress of your editorial chair, ManApe might never have been born. I confess that I would perhaps have been both afraid of it, both because of the possibility of the charge of following in the footsteps of the internationally famous Edgar Rice Burroughs, and of revamping the incomparable Poe tale, Murders in the Rue Morgue. But even so, both are interesting to dally with. Given the premise that the brain transference is possible, what would happen? 1. If the brain of a terrible criminal were transferred to the skull pan of an unusually mighty ape, and the ape transplanted from his arboreal home in Africa to the streets of London, Paris, or New York, whence the criminal whose brain he has originated, suppose his man's brain harbored thoughts of vengeance on enemies, and he now possesses the might of the great ape to carry out his vengeance. 2. If Barter somehow escaped destruction at the hands of the apes in ManApe the Mighty, and continued with his work of brain transference, building up a mighty army of great apes with the idea of avenging himself on civilization for wrongs real and fancied, apes with broad swords and chain mail with steel helmets on their heads, men's brains, savages' brains, perhaps, as their guiding intelligence, and the tenacity of apes when mortally wounded? Suppose they swept over Africa like a cloud of locusts. Or is this too feeble a simile? Suppose Africa to be laid waste by them, led by Barter, the latter styling himself a modern Alexander of horrible potentiality, and extending his scope of conquest to the Holy Land, India, Asia, the Pacific littoral? Holy cats! 3. Suppose that Barter managed, by purchase or otherwise, to acquire an island close to the American continents, within reach of either or both, and managed to transfer his activities there, using the natives of those islands, say Haiti, Cuba, Puerto Rico, etc., for his experiments, training his cohorts as an army and starting a navy by capturing all vessels putting into these places. Fancy the consternation of the Western Hemisphere when ships suddenly go silent, as regards radio, after sudden mysterious SOSs, and all trace of vessels is lost. Suppose the U.S. Navy went to investigate and also vanished. More holy cats! 4. Suppose in connection with all the suppositions above, that Barter desired to give an ironic twist to his experiments, and kept his human victims alive, but with apes' brains, as slaves of their man-ape conquerors? Suppose that out of the horror into which the world would be thrown, another Bentley should arise to help the imprisoned humans to escape their ghastly bondage? I could fancy his trials and tribulations, trying to manage a host of human beings with the brains of apes. 5. And what about the training of interns and medicos to help a potential Barter when the trade got beyond his sole ability? And apes with men's brains to perform his experiments? Do you suppose we'd all get locked up for experimenting with this sort of thing fictionally? I wouldn't care to take the entire responsibility myself, nor I fancy would you, because somebody might be inspired by our stories to attempt the thing. So might I suggest that all possible conspirators, in the shape of readers of this magazine, write to you or me and let us know whether they'd like to see it happen fictionally. If the idea appeals, and of course we can't go too heavily on horror, I'll do my best to comply, always within limits, however, utterly refusing to perform any experiments that can't be done with a typewriter and the usual 2 fingers. Arthur J. Burks, 17880 Fifth Avenue, New York City. Like in storybooks. Dear Editor, here I am again. This time I'm offering suggestions. Let's you and I and others get together and do something to these chronic kickers. It seems I can't start to enjoy our Reader's Corner without someone raising a halloo. Darn it, why in heaven's name do they buy AS if they don't like it? They are not compelled to do so. I also don't understand why people are knocking the size and quality of the paper used. It suits me okay. All the mags I read are the same way, and I pay 5 cents more for them too. I surely enjoyed Mr. Olog's letter in the March issue. Gee, it gives one the creeps. I agree with him too, that we ought to have a little something about the authors. I'm sure we'd all like to know a little more about these talented persons. When the Mountain Came to Miramar was a great deal to my liking. I think it would be a great adventure to discover some secret cave and explore it. Of course, I'd like to wiggle out of danger too, just like in storybooks. I certainly wish to congratulate you on publishing Beyond the Vanishing Point. It just suited me to a T. Heretofore, all stories dealing with life upon atoms have been just another story, but this one beats all. I enjoyed it to the utmost, and I congratulate Mr. Cummins on writing my favorite kind of story. All in all, the March issue was indeed grand. If Brown-Eyed 19 from Coronado, California, will send me her full name and address, I'll promise to answer her letter immediately upon receiving it. Gertrude Hempkin, 5730 South Ashland Avenue, Chicago, Illinois. And so do we. Dear Editor, it certainly is a swell idea of yours to answer letters to the Reader's Corner personally instead of taking up a lot of room answering them underneath as do most editors. Not only that, but it builds up a feeling of friendship between the reader and the editor, besides affording more room to publish letters and avoiding some of the bad feelings sometimes directed upon editors when they do not publish someone's letter. Now, with your kind permission, I will burst into the little ring of discussion about size, reprints, covers, artists, and authors. First, about the size and edges. The size is okay, but I wish you would change the edges from a rocky mountain to a desert state. In other words, I would like straight edges in the near future. Next, reprints. In 2 letters. An N-O. No. If the readers want reprints, why doesn't Mr. Clayton publish an annual chock full of reprints for these reprint hounds? Covers and artists. The covers have all been great, not too lurid, just right. As for the artist, Wesso is the best by a long shot. Nuff said. Authors. Ah, that's a problem. Who is the best? I could rack my brain for hours and still not decide. so I have to give a list of my favorites. R.F. Starzl, Edmund Hamilton, Harl Vincent, Sewell Peaslee Wright, Jack Williamson, S.P. Meek, Miles J. Brewer, and Ray Cummings. Before I close, there is one little thing I would like to mention. Did you ever notice that 75% of all the readers who say they do not care for science in their stories are women? Besides that, the only ones at school who think I'm cracked for reading science fiction are females. Figure it out for yourself. I hope you, Mr. Bates, will continue to be our able editor for many years to come. Jim Nicholson, Assistant Secretary, BSC, 40 Lunado Way, San Francisco, California. 4-1. Dear Editor, congratulations to Usso. His March cover for our magazine is astounding. Ray Cummings' novelette, Beyond the Vanishing Point, is absolutely the most marvelous of all his short stories. I can't rave over it enough. I never read his The Girl of the Golden Atom, but I imagine this must be something like it. It's certainly the best of the long short stories that's ever graced the insides of Astounding Stories. When the Mountain Came to Miramar is a very good story in my opinion. Terrors Unseen is a wow. No fooling. As for the Phalanxes of Atlantis, well, I simply can't get interested in it. I thought the first part very uninteresting, and decided not to bother to read the rest of it. But Wesso's splendid illustration made me do so. But I still think it is a rather poor story. But, true to form, someone will no doubt think it the most wonderful story ever written. Last but not least, of all the stories comes The Meteor Girl. It's by Jack Williamson. Need more be said? No. Forrest J. Ackerman, President, Librarian, the BSC, 530 Staples Avenue, San Francisco, California. That Awful Thing Called Love. Dear Editor, upon the occasion of my first visit to the Reader's Corner, I wish to say that Astounding Stories leads the field in science fiction stories as far as I am concerned, though at first I found them to be just so-so. Beyond the Vanishing Point by Ray Cummings proved interesting throughout. Terrors Unseen by Harl Vincent was fairly good, as was Phalanxes of Atlantis by F.V.W. Mason. But now comes the rub. Just why do you permit your authors to inject messy love affairs into otherwise excellent imaginative fiction? Just stop and think. Our young hero scientist builds himself a space flyer, steps out into the great void, conquers 1,001 perils on his voyage, and amidst our silent cheers, lands on some far distant planet. Then what does he do, I ask you? He falls in love with a maiden, or it's usually a princess, of the planet to which the reader has followed him, eagerly awaiting and hoping to share each new thrill attached to his gigantic flight. But after that it becomes merely a hopeless, doddering love affair, ending by his returning to Earth with his fair one by his side. Can you grasp that? A one-armed driver of a space flyer. But seriously, don't you think that affairs of the heart are very much out of place in our type of magazine? We buy AS for the thrill of being changed in size, in time, in dimension, or being hurtled through space at great speed, but not to read of love. Right here I wish to join forces with Glenn Owens up there in Canada in his request for plain, cold, scientific stories sans the fair sex. Otherwise our magazine is the best of its kind on the market. W. H. Flowers, 1215 North Lang Avenue, Pittsburgh, PA. Brickbats for Others. Dear Editor, brickbats and plenty of them are coming, but not your way. I'm throwing mine at those guys that want reprints, more science, etc. The only one I agree with is the fellow who would like a thicker magazine with more stories. Now for the brickbats. I'll bet a great many of your readers have read some of these reprints that some of our readers are crying for. I'll also bet that reprints would not help your friendly connections with a lot of your authors. The stories that are written now I find good. Let the present authors make their living from the stories their brains think up. As for more science, bah! Your present amount is enough. In another magazine, I read a story, and just as it reached its climax, they started explaining something. If any reader wants to write to me, my address is below. Authorman Jr., San Juan, California. Once Interplanetary Cooperation. Dear Editor, can you imagine? I have my Astounding magazine 2 whole hours and the cover is still on. Let's have some more stories like Beyond the Vanishing Point by Ray Cummings in the March issue. Another thing, let's have more interplanetary stories than we do. I think they give you something to really think about. Why is it that in every interplanetary story, the other race is always hostile? Just think, would we, if we received visitors from space, make war on them? Also, when our people make an interplanetary flight, would we go with intent to kill? Let's have some stories where the first interplanetary flight leads to cooperation between the planets involved. Dave Diamond, 1350, 52nd Street, Brooklyn, New York. In every way true. Dear Editor, I want to rejoice again over Astounding stories, reprints or no, and I hunger for them. The magazine must be described in superlatives. The reasons is pretty clear to me. After years in an experimental stage, science fiction suddenly turned up with a clash of symbols in the shape of a definite magazine. It had to cover the whole field, and its successors tried to do the same. Due to its ancestry, its logical scope was the more technical science fiction farthest removed from sheer fantasy, but nonetheless one of the most important branches. Now it is specializing in that type. When Astounding stories appeared, many of us were apt to be skeptical, particularly when we noticed that an established corporation was backing it, one that had been limited to westerns and the like. The first few issues came and there was a dubious tinge of the occult, the black magical. This petered out, and we noticed that no matter how poor the subject matter from the point of view of science fiction, the style of writing was almost always on the highest level. Then we realized that this magazine was no menace to the literature of science fiction, but a valuable addition. It could afford the better writers and hence keep up the quality of the work of every writer. It was adopting as its own a type of science fiction that the rest minimized, and that demanded good writing, a type having a skeleton of science, like the girders of a great building, holding it erect and determining its shape, yet holding the skeleton of less importance than the vision of the completed edifice. Stories with emphasis on the fiction rather than the science. But enough of that. Here is a hopeful thought for the time travelers. There is nothing in physics or chemistry to prevent you from going into the past or future, at least the future, and shaking hands with yourself or killing yourself. We will eliminate the past, for it seems that it cannot be altered physically. But take the future, not so very far from today. The matter of your body will have been totally replaced by new matter. The old will disappear and waste. Physically, you will be a new man, and physically, the matter of today may destroy that of tomorrow and return in itself unaltered. But nonetheless, there will be some limiting interval during which you have not been entirely transformed to new matter, so that an atom would have to be in 2 places at once. Maybe time traveling progresses in little jumps like emission of light, and maybe an atom can be in 2 places at once. If you are going to treat time as just another dimension, there seems to be no reason why an object which can be in one place at 2 times cannot be at one time in 2 places. This is all physics. The paradoxes of time traveling arise more particularly from its effect on what we call consciousness, the something that makes me, an individual. We can imagine an atom in 2 places at once, but not a soul, if you will. This will not bother the materialist who considers a living creature merely a machine, but it will most of us. So I must be content with offering a materialistic possibility of traveling in time. The Science Correspondence Club wishes to extend its invitation to all readers in other nations to join with all privileges save that of holding office. The latter may later be changed as our international membership increases. We have laboratory branches here, and we want them abroad in addition to scattered members. Then it will be necessary to have a governing body and director in every country. At present, all matters pertaining to foreign membership pass through my hands, and I will do my best to supply information to all who seek it. We will also be glad to hear of the work and plans of other similar organizations in other countries, as we are doing with the German Verein für Raumschifffahrt. Address all inquiries to me at 302 South 10 Brook, St. Scotia, New York, USA. P. Schuyler Miller, Foreign Director, SCC. End of Section 21. Section 22 of Astounding Stories, 18, June 1931. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mike Justice. Reader's Corner, Part 2. A wow! Dear Editor, Astounding Stories magazine is a wow! I can hardly wait until next month for the April issue. The phalanxes of Atlans, Beyond the Vanishing Point, and the Pirate Planet are perfect. Every time I start a story, I never stop till it's finished. I hope that there will appear even better stories in later issues. Here's wishing you the best of success. Fred D'Amato, 196 Green Street, New Haven, Connecticut. Is that so? Dear Editor, just a word or two. I have read several issues of Astounding Stories, and I noticed that you have taken the word science off the cover. It's just as well, for it was never inside the cover anyway. If you thought to attract readers from real science fiction fans, you were all wet, for they would never fall for the kind of things you printed. Besides, what a real fan wants to know how. There may be, I'll admit, a class of readers who like your stories, but for me I think that you ought to print real science fiction or abandon the attempt and publish out and out fairy tales. Is everybody so pleased with your book that you receive nothing but commendatory letters? That appears to be all you print, at any rate. So long, Harry Pancoast, 306 West 28th Street, Wilmington, Delaware. Short and sweet. Dear Editor, I agree perfectly with Gertrude Hemken of Chicago. Astounding Stories is okay. Why do we want a lot of deep science with our stories? We read for pleasure, not to learn science. I have been reading Astounding Stories since the first issue, and I have enjoyed every story. I read several science fiction magazines, but yours is the best. Stephen L. Garcia, 47 Hazel Avenue, Redwood City, California. Shorter and sweeter. Dear Editor, the only good things about Astounding Stories are as follows. The cover design, the stories, the size of the magazine, the illustrations in the magazine, and the authors. John Mackins, 366 West 96th Street, New York City. Sequels requested. Dear Editor, I was out of reading matter, so I bought the August issue of Astounding Stories, and it was so good that I have been buying it ever since. The only things I don't like about the magazine are the quality of the paper, which I think can be improved, and the uneven pages. The other science fiction magazine that I read has its pages even. Astounding Stories has a much better type of stories than the other magazine. There are only a few stories I have seen in your magazine which do not belong there. They are A Problem in Communication, which is not so much fiction and does not have much of a plot, and The 8 Men of Xloti, which was very well written and very interesting, but did not have enough science in it. I would like to see sequels to the following stories: Marooned Under the Sea, Beyond the Vanishing Point, Monsters of Mars, telling about another effort of the Crocodile Men to conquer Earth, The Gray Plague, telling of another attack by the Venusians, and most of all, Vagabonds of Space. I would like to see a story about their further adventures about every 3 months, just as I see the stories about Commander Hanson. I wish the best of luck for Astounding Stories. Bill Bailey, 1404 Whiteman Street, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Come again. Dear Editor, although I have been an interested reader of Astounding Stories since its inception, this is the first time that I have written, but our magazine has been so good lately that I just had to write and compliment you on your good work. There are just 2 criticisms I have of Astounding Stories. The first is that the binding sometimes comes off. The second is the rough edges. I join with many other readers in complaining that uneven edges make it hard to find a certain page, and also give the mag a cheap-looking appearance. In my opinion, the 2 best serials you have printed are Brigands of the Moon and The Pirate Planet. The 4 best novelettes are Marooned Under the Sea, The Fifth Dimension Catapult, Beyond the Vanishing Point, and Vagabonds of Space. Eugene Bray, Campbell, Missouri. How simple! Dear Editor, just a few lines to set Mr. Greenfield right on that question of how a man could be disintegrated and then reintegrated as two or more similar men. Briefly, the atomic or molecular structure of the original man could serve as a pattern to be set up in the reintegrating machine or machines while he is being dissolved by the disintegrating machine. Thus, the reintegrators could reconstruct any number of similar men by following the pattern of his molecular structure and drawing on a prearranged supply of the basic elements. As for the soul, that is merely the manifestation of the chemical combinations in the man's body, and when said chemical combinations are duplicated, the soul simply follows suit. Joseph N. Mosley, 4002 6th Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. Both in one issue. Dear Editor, I think it's about time to let you know what I think of your wonderful magazine. Of course, I have my dislikes, but they are very few. I wish you would make up your magazine larger and even the pages up. The best complete novelettes I have read were both in the same issue. They were Monsters of Mars by Edmund Hamilton and 4 Miles Within by Anthony Gilmore. Wesso is by far your best artist. Please keep him. All the other science fiction magazines have quarterlies. Why don't you have one? Goodbye, and keep Astounding Stories up to its present standard. Frederick Morrison, Long Beach, California. Good as is. Dear Editor, I have been reading your mag for about 5 months and I like it very much. I don't see what those guys want a quarterly for. This mag is good as it is, and there is no use to spoil it. Wesso is a swell artist, and the best story I read was The Wall of Death. I'd like to get acquainted with some of your readers. How about it, boys? I'll sign off. L. Sloan, Box 101, Onset, Massachusetts. Just imagine! Dear Editor, to begin, I am a mechanic more or less skilled in the handling of tools. Now, while I have seen many builders with tools who were dubbed spineless, poor fish, etc., it was not because they remotely resembled the piscatorial or crustacea families. It seems to me that when an author endows reptiles, cuttlefish, etc., with superhuman intelligence, and paints a few pictures of them as master mechanics in the use of tools, then I want to take the magazine I'm reading that allows such silly slush in its pages and feed it to my billy goat. He may be able to digest such silliness, but I can't. However, there is a redeeming feature of this sort of story. Although not written as comedy, they have a comic effect when one uses his imagination. Imagine, for instance, a giant sea crab as a traffic cop. He could direct 4 streams of traffic at once while making a date with a sweet young thing whom he had held up for a traffic violation. Then think what a great, intelligent reptile, crocodile, or what have you, could do in our prohibition enforcement service. He could place his armored body across the road, and when rum runners bumped into him, he could take his handy disintegrator and turn their load of white lightning back into the original corn patch. And suppose a giant, humanly intelligent centipede should make too much whoopee some night and endeavor to sleep upstairs without waking the wife. Even if he succeeded in getting off his 1,000 pairs of shoes, which is doubtful, he would have a sweet time keeping his myriad of legs under control after partaking of some of the tanglefoot dispensed nowadays. I hope your authors will read and heed the delicate sarcasm contained in the letter of Robert R. Young in your April issue. Carl F. Morgan, 427 East Columbia Avenue, College Park, Georgia. Craves excitement. Dear Editor, I have been a silent reader of your magazine for quite a long while, but have finally decided to come forth with my own little contribution to the Reader's Corner. So far, I have seen only 2 other women readers' letters. I suppose most women are interested in love stories, though I fail to see anything very exciting in any that are written nowadays, and I crave excitement in my own reading. I've read about most everything there is about this old earth, so I've decided to wander into new fields. Now for a little discussion about Astounding Stories. I haven't any brickbats to throw. You seem to get more of them than is necessary. I like the size, the price, the cover, the illustrator, the authors, etc. Some stories don't exactly take my fancy, but the average is 100% with me. Some that particularly pleased me were Marooned Under the Sea, way back in the September issue, Jeddah of the Lowlands, and Beyond the Vanishing Point. Grey Denim and 8 Men of Ex-Lati in the December issue write a 1, too. I congratulate Ray Cummings on his new story. even though I haven't started to read it yet. I always know I'll enjoy his work, no matter what it is. Time traveling is one of my special dishes, too. Here's a little dig. I'm sorry, I didn't think I'd have any. But I just thought of this. It seems to me that I never see any stories written by two authors. Of course, the stories by single authors are okay, but the particular two I am thinking of are Edgar A. Manley and WorldThe. They wrote The Time Annihilator, as you probably know. That was one of the best time-traveling stories I've ever read. I'm only sorry that it couldn't have been published by Astounding Stories. Well, I don't want to make myself tiresome the very first time, so I'll sign off. Please excuse the rather unconventional stationery, but I'm writing this at the office in my spare time. Hope I haven't worn my welcome out, but I had so much stored up to say. I'm waiting for the April issue, so please hurry it up. Betty Mulheron, 50 East Philadelphia Avenue, Detroit, Michigan. A Daisy for S.P. Wright. Dear Editor, were good old President George Washington himself to travel through time to the present and look upon the April issue of Astounding Stories, I am certain he would only repeat what I say. Editor, I cannot tell a lie. This is the best issue yet. The cover on this issue is unique in that Astounding Stories is written in red and white letters. I do not recall of ever having seen this done to any science fiction magazine before. Wesso's illustration leaves nothing to be desired. Going straight through the book, The Monsters of Mars. Good old Edmund Hamilton saves the world for us again in the very nick of time, and we like it too. Here's hoping there's a million more dangers threatening terror for Mr. Hamilton to save us from. By the way, I wonder who drew the illustration for this story. I can't make out his name. Next, The Exile of Time by Cummins. Exciting and well illustrated. Hell's Dimension is well written and very interesting. Would have liked it longer. The World Behind the Moon is splendid. More by Mr. Ernst, please. More from Mr. Gilmore, too, because of his novelette, 4 Miles Within. The Lake of Light by that popular author Jack Williamson surpasses his The Meteor Girl in a recent issue of our magazine. And now I come to the last and perhaps most interesting story of the issue. Mr. Sewell Peaslee Wright's record of the interplanetary adventures of the Special Patrol as told by Commander John Hanson. This series is unsurpassable in its vivid realness. I can't help but believe that these tales really occurred, or will occur in the distant future, and Mr. Wright is as expert at conceiving new forms of life as Edmund Hamilton is at saving our Earth. The Reader's Corner is an interesting feature, and I am glad to hear that Murder Madness and Brigands of the Moon are now in book form. Forrest J. Ackerman, 530 Staples Avenue, San Francisco, California. Mass Production. Dear Editor, after reading Mr. Greenfield's letter in your April issue regarding my story, An Extra Man, I feel that I should like to call his attention to a point which, it seems to me, he has overlooked, namely, that the reconstructed men were not composed of the original physical matter of the disintegrated man, but of identical elements, all of which are at present known and available to science. According to the hypothesis, Drayle could have produced as many entities as he desired and provided for, just as a radio broadcast is reproduced in as many places as are prepared for its reception. The vibrations alone are transmitted, and the reproduction is the result of a reciprocal mechanical action by physical matter at the receiving end. Any radio engineer knows that the original sound waves are not transported, but merely their impress upon the electrical radio wave. So, Drayle's disintegrating and sending apparatus only transmitted the vibrations which enabled his machines at the receiving end to select from a more than adequate supply of raw material, in due proportion and quantities, as much as was required for the reproduction of the disintegrated entities. I think that if Mr. Greenfield will reread the story, noting the following references, he will agree that if the hypothesis is accepted, the conclusion is logical. 1. It is only Jackson G. and not Drayle who speaks of transmitting the constituent elements by radio, page 120. 2. The scientist Drayle says, page 129, we already know the elements that make the human body, and we can put them together in their proper proportions and arrangements, but we have not been able to introduce the vitalizing spark, the key vibrations, to start it going. He does not say that tangible matter can be transmitted by radio. 3. In the account of Drayle's preliminary experiments, page 122, there is no statement to the effect that the original material composing the disintegrated glass was used in its recreation. 4. There is nothing in the story to indicate that the original physical composition of the disintegrated man was transported, in any manner, to any outside location. The process of disintegration was necessary to obtain the vibrations that would make possible their repetition, which under proper conditions would induce a reproduction of the original, just as a song must be sung before it can be reproduced upon a phonograph disc, but which, once recorded, can be repeated times without number. 5. Drail's question, page 124, "Have you arranged the elements?" refers to the elements out of which all mankind is composed, and which Drail has previously mentioned, page 120. 6. The narrator emphasizes this aspect of the discovery when he says, on page 124, "I seem to see man's, not the man's, elementary dust and vapors whirled from great containers upward into a stratum of shimmering air, and gradually assumed the outlines of a human form that became first opaque, then solid, and then a sentient being." And again, page 126, "The best of the race could be multiplied indefinitely, and man could make man literally out of the dust of the earth. This does not imply a split up of one individual into several smaller sizes or fractional parts, but rather the production of identical entities exactly as thousands of phonograph records can be recreated from the master matrix." 7. As to the question of soul, I suggest that inasmuch as what we call the soul of an individual is always judged by that individual's behavior, and that medical science now maintains that behavior is largely dependent upon our physical mechanism, it would follow that the identical human mechanisms would have identical souls. Jackson G. The Reader's Corner. All readers are extended a sincere and cordial invitation to come over in the Reader's Corner and join in our monthly discussion of stories, authors, scientific principles, and possibilities. Everything that's of a common interest in connection with our astounding stories. Although from time to time the editor may make a comment or so, this is a department primarily for readers, and we want you to make full use of it. Likes, dislikes, criticisms, explanations, roses, brickbats, suggestions. Everything's welcome here, so come over in the Reader's Corner and discuss it with all of us. The Editor. End of Section 22. End of Astounding Stories 18, June 1931.